A first-class ticket, a billion-dollar company, and a simple request for a cup of coffee. For Dr. Maya Harrison, it was supposed to be just another business trip. But on Atlantic Airways Flight 719, her routine request was met with a dismissive glare and a chilling refusal from a flight attendant named Patricia Bennett. What started as a quiet, demeaning insult would not end quietly. Maya wasn't just any passenger. She was a force of nature, and she decided right then that this flight wasn't going anywhere. This isn't merely a story about poor customer service. It's about how one woman's defiant stand at 35,000 feet exposed a web of corruption that went far beyond a single bigoted act and unleashed consequences so precise they would alter countless lives forever. The polished chrome and hushed tones of the first-class cabin on Atlantic Airways Flight 719 from Denver to New York were designed to soothe the titans of industry, discreet celebrities, and old-money heirs who typically filled these plush, oversized seats. The soft blue ceiling lights dimmed to a gentle glow as the morning sun streamed through half-closed window shades, casting geometric patterns across the cabin floor. The subtle whine of the engines provided a constant, reassuring backdrop to the clink of ice in crystal tumblers. On this crisp Tuesday morning, Dr. Maya Harrison settled into Seat 2A, reviewing quarterly projections on her tablet. She was, by any measure, more successful than nearly everyone else on the plane. At 38, Maya was the founder and CEO of Ecosphere Technologies, a company revolutionizing the world with AI-driven sustainable agriculture solutions. Her innovations were literally changing how the planet fed itself. She had graced the covers of Forbes and Time, delivered keynote addresses at Davos, and held patents reshaping entire global industries. Her net worth required both a calculator and a comfortable chair to contemplate. Yet, to Patricia Bennett, the senior flight attendant working the first-class cabin, Maya was apparently invisible. Patricia, a woman in her mid-50s, with perfectly coiffed silver-blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, moved through the cabin with theatrical grace. 27 years earlier, she had been the golden girl of Atlantic Airways, featured in their promotional materials, the face of their premium service. But the decades had hardened something in her. Each passing year, each new corporate restructuring, each batch of younger, prettier flight attendants had slowly chipped away at the shine she once carried. She offered pre-departure champagne to William Blackwell in 1C, a distinguished attorney in an impeccable suit, addressing him as Mr. Blackwell with practiced deference. She chatted warmly with Victoria Hamilton in 3B, complimenting her on her cashmere wrap. She took her time making each of the white passengers feel valued and catered to. When she passed Maya's seat, however, her eyes slid over her as if 2A were an empty space, a mere architectural feature of the bulkhead. No greeting, no offer of a drink, nothing. Captain James Sullivan, a veteran pilot with 22 years of experience, was completing his pre-flight checklist in the cockpit. The cockpit's array of instruments glowed in the dimmed light as his experienced hands moved methodically across the controls. Known for running a tight ship, he took pride in Atlantic Airways' stellar safety record. The first officer beside him, Thomas Reynolds, was relatively new to the airline, but already respected for his precision and cool temperament. Elena Rodriguez, the junior flight attendant assisting in first class, was beginning her second year with Atlantic Airways. Her genuine smile and attentive service had already earned her positive passenger feedback, though she often felt intimidated by Patricia's domineering presence in the cabin. She had witnessed Patricia's subtle biases before, but had never found the courage to speak up a silence that weighed on her conscience more with each passing flight. Maya, accustomed to the subtle and not-so-subtle slights that came with being a black woman in overwhelmingly white spaces, initially let it go. She was engrossed in reviewing a complex sustainability prospectus, her mind 1,000 miles away deep in the intricacies of nitrogen-fixing bacteria and machine learning algorithms. She would simply ask when Patricia came back around, but Patricia didn't come back around. Eventually, Elena approached with a warm smile. Ma'am, can I get you something to drink before takeoff? Champagne, perhaps, or orange juice? Just some water, please, Maya replied, giving Elena a genuine smile. Thank you. Elena returned it instantly and hurried off. The moment of slight could have ended there. A minor blip, a misunderstanding. But as the plane pushed back from the gate at Denver International Airport, the pattern began to solidify. The engines rumbled louder, vibrating through the cabin floor. Outside ground crew in bright yellow vests disappeared from view as the massive aircraft began its slow taxi toward the runway. Maya's mind drifted to a boardroom 6 years earlier when a venture capitalist had asked if the real CEO would be joining their meeting. She recalled the professor who had suggested she consider nursing instead of agricultural biochemistry, the security guard who had followed her through the luxury department store despite her designer handbag. Each memory was a small piece of armor she'd forged, transforming slights into strength. Her mother's voice echoed in her thoughts. They'll notice you when you own the room. Now she owned entire buildings, but the same prejudices persisted. A familiar knot formed in her stomach, not just anger, but exhaustion. Sometimes she wondered what it would be like to simply exist without constantly having to assert her right to occupy space. What would it be like just once to be served without having to demand service, to be seen without having to announce herself? After the aircraft reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, the cabin service began in earnest. The soft ping of the seatbelt sign turning off was followed by the gentle hum of the food service carts being prepared in the galley. Patricia commanded the small galley with an air of unassailable authority, beginning drink and meal orders from the front of the cabin as was customary. She engaged William Blackwell in a lengthy conversation about his wine selection. She offered Victoria Hamilton an extra pillow. She took orders from every passenger in the first-class cabin except Maya. Patricia glided past seat 2A, without a word, her gaze fixed on the passenger in row 3. This time it was impossible to ignore. A deliberate, calculated act of erasure. Maya felt a familiar, cold knot tighten in her stomach. The exhaustion of constantly having to prove her belonging, of having to assert her own existence in spaces where her credentials and currency should have made itself evident. She waited a moment, took a slow, deep breath to steady her nerves, and pressed the call button. The soft electronic chime seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet cabin. Patricia appeared, the plastic smile gone, replaced by undisguised annoyance. Her lips thinned to a tight line, eyes narrowing slightly. Yes. The word was clipped. Hello. Maya began, her voice even and calm. I believe you may have missed me during the service. I'd like a cup of black coffee, please. Patricia stared for a beat too long. A flicker of disdain crossed her face before being smoothed over with professional indifference. I'll get to it when I'm finished with the other passengers. The dismissal was as sharp as a slap. Maya watched as Patricia turned and proceeded to serve the passenger behind her, then the one behind that. Minutes stretched into an uncomfortable eternity. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the cabin, its rich scent a constant reminder of what she'd been denied. Every other passenger had been served. Trays were being laid, silverware clinked against fine china. Maya sat a statue of patience, her gaze fixed on Patricia. She wasn't just a CEO. She was a scientist. She observed. She collected data. She identified patterns. And the pattern here was undeniable. For a brief moment, Maya considered letting it go. Was this really worth the energy? The confrontation. She had meetings to prepare for a company to run. Maybe it was easier to just endure it, as she had so many times before. But something inside her rebelled at the thought. Not today, not this time. With the rest of the cabin settled, Patricia returned to the galley, busying herself with rearranging napkins. She made no move to get the coffee. Maya pressed the call button again. The light pinged an electronic summons in the quiet cabin. Patricia ignored it. Maya pressed it again, holding it down for 3 full seconds. The chime was more insistent this time, cutting through the cabin's ambient hum. Several passengers glanced over momentary annoyance, turning to curiosity as they noticed the tension beginning to build. From across the aisle, William Blackwell lowered his newspaper slightly, his attorney's instinct for conflict drawing his attention. His eyes narrowed, taking in the scene with professional assessment. Patricia emerged from the galley, her face a thunderous mask. She marched to Maya's seat, her movements stiff with anger. The cabin seemed to go silent, the engine noise fading into the background as attention focused on the confrontation.
"I am very busy, as you can see,"
she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper.
"You will have to wait your turn."
Maya looked at the fully served cabin. She looked at Elena, who stood nearby with empty hands, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and helpless concern. She looked back at Patricia's furious eyes. "My turn for what?" Maya asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Everyone else has been served. I have made a simple, polite request for a cup of coffee twice now. Elena was perfectly lovely earlier, but you have gone out of your way to ignore me since I stepped on this plane. So let me ask you directly. Is there a reason you are refusing to serve me?" The directness of the question seemed to stun Patricia. Her face flushed a blotchy red, the color spreading down her neck and up to her hairline.
"We reserve the right to refuse service to disruptive passengers,"
she snapped, her voice rising. The absurdity hung in the air. Maya hadn't moved, hadn't raised her voice, had done nothing but exist in her seat. "Disruptive," Maya repeated, a single eyebrow arching. "By asking for coffee? Or is my presence in this seat what you find disruptive?" The accusation, now unveiled and shimmering in the cabin air, was undeniable. William Blackwell fully lowered his newspaper. Victoria Hamilton paused with a fork halfway to her mouth. They were no longer just passengers. They were an audience. Elena, watching from the galley, felt her heart racing. In her short career, she'd witnessed Patricia's pattern of selective service, but never this blatant, never this confrontational. She thought of her mother, who had worked as a hotel maid for 30 years, coming home with similar stories of invisibility. A familiar shame and anger rose in her chest. Patricia, cornered and exposed, made a fatal mistake. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a condescending tone. "Listen, honey." She began, the word dripping with false familiarity. "Maybe you're not used to how things work up here. This cabin is for our premier guests. Sometimes people get upgraded by mistake. If you just sit tight and keep quiet, nobody has to make a fuss." It was the final, unforgivable piece of data. Patricia hadn't just ignored her. She had constructed an entire narrative to justify it. A narrative in which a black woman, regardless of her elegant suit or poised demeanor, could not possibly belong in first class unless it was by accident. She wasn't a CEO. She wasn't a valued customer. She was a mistake to be managed. Maya felt the cold knot in her stomach dissolve, replaced by crystalline clarity. The exhaustion vanished. The frustration evaporated. In its place was singular, unshakable resolve. This was no longer about a cup of coffee. This was about the fundamental principle of dignity. She looked Patricia directly in the eye. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "Patricia," she said deliberately, using her name, "you have made two critical errors. First, you assumed you knew who I was. You don't. Second, and far more importantly, you assumed I would tolerate your bigotry. I won't." Maya picked up her phone. "You are creating a hostile and unsafe environment. I'm going to need to speak with the captain immediately." Patricia scoffed, a brittle, ugly sound that echoed in the now silent cabin. "The captain is busy flying the plane. He doesn't have time for your little tantrums." "He'll make time." Maya set her fingers, already navigating to the airline's corporate contact page. "And I assure you what's coming isn't a tantrum. It's a reckoning."
She looked past Patricia to Elena, who was watching with wide, horrified eyes. "Elena," Maya said, her tone shifting to one of command. "Please inform Captain Sullivan that a passenger in seat 2A needs to report a safety concern regarding the conduct of his cabin crew. Tell him it's urgent." The word safety was key. It was a trigger in the world of aviation. It bypassed customer service complaints and went straight to the cockpit. As Elena hurried toward the cockpit, Maya felt a momentary wave of doubt. Was she overreacting? Going too far? Making a scene over coffee? The professional concerns flickered briefly how this might appear in the press, the possible impact on her company, the exhausting inevitability of being labeled difficult or angry. But as she caught Patricia's expression, the smug certainty that Maya would back down, that the system would protect her, as it always had, Maya's resolve hardened. No. This wasn't about coffee anymore. This was about every invisible person who had ever been erased, ignored, or deemed unworthy of basic respect. If not her with all her resources and privilege, then who would stand against this? Elena, pale and trembling, simply nodded and scurried toward the front of the plane, leaving Patricia standing alone in the aisle, her face a picture of disbelief and dawning horror. The plane was still flying, but Dr. Maya Harrison had just seized control. The cockpit door of a commercial airliner is a sacred barrier. For a pilot to open it mid-flight for a passenger issue is rare. For them to emerge and address the cabin is an event of significance. When Captain James Sullivan appeared, he radiated an aura of calm authority. He was a man in his late 40s with a neatly trimmed beard and the focused, steady eyes of someone who spends his life making critical decisions based on limited data. The overhead lights caught the silver threads in his dark hair as he moved deliberately through the cabin. He approached seat 2A, his gaze sweeping the scene, Maya poised and resolute, Patricia standing stiffly nearby, her face a mask of defiant indignation, the other first-class passengers all pretending not to watch, but missing nothing. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Sullivan," he said, his voice a low baritone designed to de-escalate. "My first officer informed me you had a safety concern." Maya met his gaze directly. "Thank you for coming, Captain. I do. My concern is with the fitness for duty of your senior flight attendant, Patricia Bennett." The captain's eyebrows rose slightly. Fitness for duty. This was specific operational language, not the usual passenger complaint. "That's correct." Maya continued, her tone as precise as a legal brief. "Since boarding, Ms. Bennett has engaged in a consistent and targeted pattern of discriminatory behavior. She has repeatedly and deliberately refused me service while attending to every other passenger in this cabin. When I finally addressed the issue with her, she responded not with an apology, but with condescension, hostility, and a baseless accusation that I was being disruptive. She then made an insinuation that I did not belong in this cabin." She paused, letting the words land. The air conditioning hummed softly as tension built in the small space. "Captain, a flight attendant's primary responsibility is the safety and well-being of all passengers. An individual who is so clouded by personal prejudice that she cannot perform her basic duties for every passenger under her care is by definition a liability. Her judgment is compromised. In the event of a real emergency, I have zero confidence that she would be able to assist me or any other passenger she deems unworthy. Her behavior is not just insulting. It is unprofessional, erratic, and it creates an unsafe environment. Therefore, I must insist that this issue is addressed before we proceed." Captain Sullivan listened intently, his expression unreadable. He turned to Patricia. "Ms. Bennett, what is your response to this allegation?" Patricia, seeing the captain as her ally, let her victimhood narrative pour out. "Captain, this woman has been difficult from the moment she got on. She's been demanding and aggressive. I was simply trying to complete my service in an orderly fashion, and she became belligerent. She's twisting everything I've been with this airline for 30 years. I would never..."
So you deny refusing her service? The captain interrupted, cutting through the hysterics. I didn't refuse. I told her I would get to her when I could. Patricia insisted, her voice rising an octave. The fluorescent overhead light cast harsh shadows across her face, emphasizing the lines of strain around her mouth. Maya interjected calmly. Captain, you can very easily verify my account. Elena witnessed the entire exchange, as did Mr. Blackwell in 1C and Mrs. Hamilton in 3B. I'm sure they can confirm that I have been nothing but quiet and patient until my repeated polite requests were met with open hostility. All eyes, including the captain's, subtly shifted to the other passengers. William Blackwell gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Victoria Hamilton looked down at her lap, but her flushed cheeks told a story of their own. The collective unspoken testimony was damning. Captain Sullivan's face hardened. He was a pilot, not a social worker, but he was a master of risk assessment. He had a volatile crew member, a credible and exceptionally articulate passenger making a serious claim, and a cabin full of witnesses. Continuing the flight under these conditions was a risk. The tension was a palpable entity in the cabin, hanging in the air like the gathering pressure before a storm. Patricia, he said, his voice now devoid of warmth. Go to the rear galley. Stay there. Elena, you will handle the first-class cabin for the remainder of the flight. Patricia looked as if he had physically struck her. What, Captain, you can't be serious. You're taking her side. I am not taking a side, Ms. Bennett. Captain Sullivan corrected her, his voice dropping to an icy calm. I am managing my crew and ensuring the safety of this flight. You have become the center of a major disruption. Now go to the rear galley. That's a direct order. Defeated, humiliated, and seething with a rage that seemed to vibrate off her, Patricia turned and stalked down the aisle, bumping the shoulder of a passenger in the economy cabin as she went. The slam of the rear galley curtain echoed through the suddenly silent aircraft. The captain turned back to Maya. Ma'am, I apologize for the conduct of my crew member. Please rest assured it will be dealt with. Can I get you that coffee now? He had hoped that would be the end of it. A small victory for the passenger, a reprimand for the flight attendant, and the flight could continue to New York. He had underestimated Dr. Maya Harrison. No, thank you, Captain, Maya said, her voice unwavering. And I'm afraid this is not over. You've addressed the immediate symptom, but not the root cause. You have a crew member who has demonstrated a clear inability to perform her duties professionally. Removing her to the back of the plane doesn't solve the problem. It just hides it for a few hours. Inside, Maya wrestled with a moment of doubt. She had options. She could accept this temporary resolution, get to her meetings in New York, and file a complaint later. The easier path beckoned. But something in her refused to let this slide into the bureaucratic abyss where such incidents so often disappeared. She held up her phone where she had already drafted an email. This isn't about me getting a coffee. This is about ensuring that no other passenger is subjected to this kind of treatment. It's also about corporate accountability. As a CEO myself, I understand the importance of protocols. What happens when we land? Will Ms. Bennett simply move on to her next flight and do this to someone else? Someone who might not have the confidence or the resources to challenge her? The captain was taken aback. Ma'am, there will be a full report filed. Our corporate office will investigate. A report is not enough, Maya stated flatly. I have lost all faith in the professionalism and safety of this cabin crew. The trust between passenger and crew has been irrevocably broken. As a fare-paying passenger in your care, I am officially stating that I do not feel safe continuing this journey under these circumstances. She took a breath and delivered the final decisive blow. I am the CEO of Ecosphere Technologies. We hold the platinum corporate account with Atlantic Airways, spending upwards of $25 million a year on travel for our executives and scientists. My executive assistant, Diana Morales, is on standby. When we land, I will be making a formal complaint, not just as an individual, but as one of your largest corporate clients. However, I am not willing to wait until we land in New York. The integrity of this flight has been compromised.
The mention of the corporate account and the specific dollar amount was like a lightning strike in the cabin. The captain's professional demeanor faltered for a fraction of a second. The gentle hum of the engines seemed to grow louder in the tense silence. This wasn't just an angry passenger anymore. This was a high-stakes business problem. "What exactly are you asking for Dr. Harrison?" he asked, using her title for the first time. "I'm not asking for anything," Maya replied. "I'm stating a position. I no longer consent to being a passenger on this flight. Federal Aviation Administration regulations are quite clear about a captain's authority in situations involving passenger disputes and crew integrity. You have a choice. You can proceed to New York with a passenger who has declared she feels unsafe and a compromised crew member and deal with the monumental legal and corporate fallout that will ensue. Or you can acknowledge the severity of this situation and return to the gate." She leaned forward slightly. "You are the pilot in command. The decision is yours. But I want it on the record right here, right now, with these witnesses that I have formally requested to be let off this aircraft at the nearest possible opportunity due to a credible safety concern. I believe the nearest opportunity is Denver International Airport." She had grounded the plane not by force, not by hysterics, but by a calm, logical, and legally sound dismantling of the captain's options. She had cornered him with procedure and liability. Continuing the flight now would be his own personal gamble, a willful disregard of a passenger's stated safety concern. Captain Sullivan stood there for a long moment, the weight of his command pressing down on him. He looked at Maya's unblinking eyes. He looked at the nervous faces of the other passengers. He thought of the mountain of paperwork, the National Transportation Safety Board inquiries, the corporate hearings. He thought of the phrase, "A passenger has formally requested to be let off the aircraft." He made the only choice a seasoned pilot could make, the choice that minimized risk. He keyed his radio. His voice, broadcast throughout the entire cabin, was heavy with resignation. "Denver Tower. This is Atlantic Airways 719. We have a cabin safety issue and will need to return to the gate. Declaring pan-pan." A collective gasp went through the aircraft. Pan-pan. The international signal for an urgent situation that falls short of a full-blown mayday. The overhead speaker crackled with the tower's acknowledgement, adding to the surreal moment. The plane began a slow, graceful bank, turning back toward Denver. Through the windows, the vast expanse of the Rockies tilted as the aircraft changed course, sunlight flashing across the cabin in rhythmic pulses. Maya Harrison sat back in her seat. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't created a scene. She had simply refused to be erased. And in doing so, she had done the unthinkable. She had turned the plane around. The real turbulence was just beginning. The return to gate B-24 was surreal. Passengers who had been settling in for a cross-country flight now peered out the windows at the familiar tarmac they had just left. A low murmur rippled through the economy cabin as flight attendants offered vague, sanitized explanations about an unforeseen cabin issue. But in first class, the silence was thick with tension. The soft whir of the air conditioning and occasional electronic ping from the crew's communication system punctuated the uncomfortable quiet. Elena moved through the cabin with nervous efficiency, avoiding eye contact with Maya, but ensuring her water glass remained filled. Her hands trembled slightly as she collected unused items from the galley. William Blackwell kept glancing over his legal mind, clearly calculating the implications of what he'd witnessed. Victoria Hamilton appeared torn between embarrassment and fascination. Maya felt the weight of her decision settling onto her shoulders. Had she done the right thing? There would be consequences. Meetings missed, schedules disrupted, possibly even press coverage. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the full burden of standing up against injustice. It was never easy, never clean, never without cost. But neither was remaining silent. In the rear galley, Patricia seethed, her mind racing through possible defenses.
She had weathered passenger complaints before. She knew the system. She knew how to work it. This would blow over like all the others, she told herself. But in her gut, she felt something different this time. Something final. Patricia's mind flashed back to 20 years earlier, to the first time she'd been called out for treating a black passenger differently. The airline had backed her completely, then dismissing the complaint without investigation. That moment had taught her a dangerous lesson, that there were no consequences for her prejudice. Now, as the plane returned to the gate because of her actions, a cold fear began to replace her anger. In the cockpit, Captain Sullivan was coordinating with the tower ground control and gate personnel. He had initiated the paperwork that would follow him for months. He knew this could impact his record, his standing with the airline. But there had been no other viable option. The passengers' invocation of safety concerns had activated protocols that couldn't be ignored. As the jet bridge reconnected with a dull thud, Captain Sullivan's voice came over the intercom again, this time addressing only the first-class cabin. Dr. Harrison, a gate agent, and a corporate representative will be meeting you as you deplane. He then switched to the all-cabin address. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We ask that you all remain seated while we resolve this situation. Maya gathered her briefcase and her coat, her movements deliberate and unhurried. As she stood, William Blackwell caught her eye. Dr. Harrison, he said, his voice low but clear. That was the most professionally executed maneuver I've ever witnessed. If you need a witness, you have my card. He slid a thick, embossed business card into her hand. Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. I appreciate that, Maya said, accepting it with a nod. As she walked toward the open door, she passed Patricia, who had been summoned from the rear galley. The flight attendant stood near the cockpit, her face pale, her eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and fear. She refused to look at Maya, staring instead at a fixed point on the bulkhead, as if trying to will the entire situation out of existence. Waiting on the jet bridge were two people, a flustered-looking gate agent in an Atlantic Airways uniform, and a man in a rumpled suit who introduced himself as Neil Montgomery, the station's duty manager. The fluorescent lights of the jet bridge cast harsh shadows across their concerned faces. Montgomery had the harried look of someone whose quiet Tuesday had just been torpedoed. Dr. Harrison, he began, his tone attempting a placating smoothness. I'm Neil Montgomery. I understand there was some misunderstanding on board. We deeply apologize for any inconvenience. We can get you booked on the next flight to LaGuardia, which leaves in 90 minutes. Of course, we'll ensure your comfort in our flagship lounge until then. He was treating it like a missed connection, a problem to be solved with a new ticket and a complimentary glass of wine. Maya gave him a cool, appraising look. Mr. Montgomery, she said, her voice leaving no room for misunderstanding. Let's be very clear. This was not a misunderstanding. This was an incident of targeted harassment and discrimination by a member of your crew. This plane did not return to the gate because of an inconvenience. It returned because I, a passenger, declared a safety issue stemming from the hostile and unprofessional conduct of flight attendant Patricia Bennett. So, no, I will not be getting on the next flight. I will not be flying Atlantic Airways at all today. Montgomery's face fell. This was not going to be an easy fix. The artificial lighting of the jet bridge highlighted the sudden sheen of sweat on his forehead. Secondly, Maya continued, I will require the full names and employee identification numbers of the entire flight crew. Captain James Sullivan, First Officer Thomas Reynolds, and flight attendants Patricia Bennett and Elena Rodriguez. I'm not sure I'm authorized to provide that, Montgomery stammered, his hands fidgeting with his tie. You can either provide it to me now or you can provide it to my legal team in a few hours. The choice is yours, Maya said calmly. I will also need a written incident report from you as the ranking airline official on site detailing the reason Flight 799 returned to the gate. Behind them, the cockpit door opened. Captain Sullivan stepped out, followed by Elena. The captain handed a clipboard to Montgomery. Neil, here's my preliminary report.
I need you to get statements from the crew and the relevant passengers." He then looked at Maya. "Dr. Harrison, for the record, my first officer is Thomas Reynolds, and for what it's worth, you handled yourself with remarkable composure. Professionalism should be the standard for everyone, Captain." "Not a remarkable exception," she replied, though her tone held a note of acknowledgement for his own difficult position. Elena looked at Maya, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. "Ma'am, Dr. Harrison, I am so sorry for what happened. What she did was wrong. Everyone saw it." In that moment, something shifted between them. A connection formed through shared understanding of what it meant to be deemed less than by someone like Patricia. Maya saw in Elena's eyes not just a potential witness, but a young woman who had been silently carrying her own burdens in a system designed to protect people like Patricia. "Thank you, Elena. It takes courage to say that," Maya said, giving the young woman a brief, reassuring nod. "Especially when the easier path would be silence." Elena swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "It's not the first time," she whispered. "She does this regularly." The statement hung in the air, heavy with implication. The station manager, Montgomery, looked like a man caught in crossfire. He was desperately trying to de-escalate to contain the problem within the confines of the airport. But Maya was already thinking several moves ahead. She took out her phone, stepped to the side of the jet bridge traffic, and made a call. "Diana," she said, her voice now warm and familiar. "It's Maya. I've had an incident on a flight out of Denver. I won't be making the New York meeting." She paused, listening. "No, I'm fine, but I need you to do a few things. First, cancel my return ticket on Atlantic Airways. Cancel all upcoming bookings for me on that airline. Second, I want you to draft a letter to Richard Donovan." Richard Donovan was the CEO of Atlantic Airways. "Inform Mr. Donovan's office that as of today, Ecosphere Technologies is suspending its $25 million corporate travel account, with his airline effective immediately pending a full and satisfactory resolution to this matter. Reference Atlantic Airways Flight 719. They'll know what it's about. And finally, get me the number for Sofia Ramirez at Hernandez, Ramirez and Fisher." Hernandez, Ramirez and Fisher was one of the most powerful corporate litigation firms in the country. Sofia Ramirez was a legend, a shark who smelled blood in the water from miles away. Montgomery, who had overheard the call, went visibly pale. The clipboard in his hands shook slightly. This was no longer a station-level issue. This was a multi-million-dollar corporate crisis that had just been activated by a few calm sentences on a cell phone. The ripple effects were spreading. Meanwhile, back on the aircraft, chaos was brewing. The deplaned crew, Patricia, Elena, and the two pilots were being escorted to an operations office. The harsh fluorescent lights of the terminal created stark shadows as they walked through the concourse, drawing curious glances from travelers. Patricia was protesting loudly, her voice rising to a shrill pitch, claiming she was the victim of a coordinated attack. "She targeted me. She was looking for a payout. This is what they do," she cried to anyone who would listen, her voice shrill. Elena, sequestered in a separate room, gave a quiet, tearful but firm statement to Neil Montgomery that corroborated every detail of Maya's account. As she spoke, the weight of years of silent witnessing seemed to lift from her shoulders. This wasn't just about today, she realized. This was about every passenger Patricia had ever mistreated while Elena had stayed silent. Captain Sullivan and his first officer gave dry factual reports sticking strictly to the timeline of events and regulations, but the subtext was clear. Patricia Bennett had been the catalyst. At Atlantic Airways headquarters in Chicago, CEO Richard Donovan was in the middle of a quarterly earnings presentation when his assistant slipped him a note. His face darkened as he read it, the blood draining from his features. "I apologize, but we need to take a short break," he announced to the room of executives and board members. "There's an urgent operational matter that requires my immediate attention." The sleek boardroom emptied as Donovan strode to his office, the glass walls offering a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. Rain streaked down the windows, casting rippling shadows across the polished desk. In the privacy of his office, he read the email from Ecosphere Technologies and immediately placed a call to the Denver station. "What the hell is happening out there?" he demanded when Neil Montgomery came on the line. The phone line crackled with tension. Montgomery gave him a condensed version of events, emphasizing the high-profile nature of the passenger and the potential public relations nightmare brewing. "Damage control, now," Donovan ordered. "I want this contained." He summoned Gregory Parker, the Senior Vice President of Human Resources. Parker was a company man through and through, a veteran of countless internal disputes. His primary directive always was to protect the company. This meant minimizing liability, controlling the narrative, and whenever possible, finding a way to blame anyone but the airline. "We have a situation," Donovan told him, sliding the email across his desk. "A high-value corporate client is threatening to pull a $25 million account over a discrimination complaint against one of our senior flight attendants." Parker skimmed the email, his expression calculating. "Patricia Bennett," he muttered. "She's been with us for 30 years, union protected, strong performance record." Parker's mind flashed back to 3 previous complaints about Patricia that he had personally buried. Minor incidents easily dismissed, but a pattern he had chosen to ignore. A weight settled in the pit of his stomach. Had his protection of a problematic employee finally caught up with the company? "I don't care if she's been with us since the Wright brothers," Donovan snapped. "This Dr. Harrison has just grounded one of our planes and is threatening to take her story to the press. Find out what happened and fix it. Fast." Parker nodded. His mind was already formulating strategies. If this passenger was looking for a payout, they could offer a settlement with a strict NDA. If she was making a principled stand, they would need a different approach. Either way, his job was to protect Atlantic Airways, its reputation, and its bottom line. "I'll handle it," he assured Donovan. "We'll get the full story from Patricia and develop a response strategy." As he left the CEO's office, Parker was already drafting an internal memo to the legal department. This needed to be managed carefully, very carefully. But as the first reports from Denver began coming in, including Captain Sullivan's preliminary statement and the witness accounts from First Class Parker, felt the first stirrings of genuine concern. This wasn't a simple he said, she said situation. There were multiple witnesses, including another crew member, and the passenger's account was detailed, specific, and damning. He picked up his phone and dialed Patricia Bennett's number. They needed to get their story straight and fast. The airline's reputation and his own career might depend on it. Gregory Parker sat across from Patricia Bennett in a sterile conference room at Atlantic Airways' Chicago headquarters. The flight attendant had been flown in immediately, her next assignments reassigned pending an administrative review. The conference room felt too small, too airless, the bland corporate artwork on the walls at odds with the tension filling the space. "Patricia," Parker began, his voice professionally sympathetic, "I need you to walk me through exactly what happened on Flight 719. Patricia, coached by her union representative during the flight to Chicago, was ready. She had spent the last 24 hours crafting a compelling narrative of her own victimhood. She straightened in her chair, smoothing her uniform skirt with practiced precision. "Mr. Parker, I've given 30 years of my life to this airline. 30 years. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I've served celebrities, politicians, even royalty. Never in all my time have I been treated the way Dr. Harrison treated me." She spun a tale of veiled threats and a demanding attitude from Maya, starting from the moment of boarding. "She had this air about her," Patricia said, her voice trembling with manufactured sincerity. "She was dismissive, arrogant. When I didn't rush to her side the second she pressed the call button, she became hostile. She twisted my words. She accused me of these horrible things. It was a setup. I could feel it. She was baiting me, recording me. I'm sure of it." As she spoke, memories flashed through her mind. Memories she would never share.
her father raging about those people taking jobs they didn't deserve. The satisfaction she'd felt the first time she'd deliberately overlooked a black passenger in first class and gotten away with it. The gradual escalation over years, the little power trips that had gone unchecked, feeding a sense of impunity that had grown like a cancer. Gregory Parker listened, nodding sympathetically. This was a version of events he could work with. It painted the passenger as the problem, the instigator. And her grounding the plane, Parker prodded. Tell me about that. It was a power play, Patricia said, her voice dripping with indignation. The moment she mentioned her corporate account, it all became clear. This was extortion. She was using her position to bully me, to bully the captain, to get something for free. It's a form of corporate terrorism is what it is. Parker latched onto the narrative. So in your professional opinion, she was never in any distress. Her claims of feeling unsafe were a tactic. Absolutely, Patricia confirmed. It was a performance, and the captain, he was young, he got scared. He folded under pressure instead of standing by his crew. Parker's course was set. The official strategy would be to quietly discredit Dr. Maya Harrison. He commissioned an internal report that heavily favored Patricia's version of events. He cherry-picked phrases from the captain's report, focusing on the lack of any physical altercation. He downplayed Elena Rodriguez's testimony as that of a junior, impressionable employee who was intimidated by the high-profile passenger. But as he prepared the sanitized report, a nagging doubt crept into his mind. He had covered for Patricia before minor complaints easily dismissed. But this was different. A grounded plane, multiple witnesses, a high-profile CEO. For the first time, Parker wondered if he was protecting the wrong person. The first move was a carefully worded letter from Atlantic Airways' legal department to Sofia Ramirez Maya's lawyer. The letter was a masterpiece of corporate deflection. It expressed regret for the miscommunication on Flight 719, but firmly rejected any allegations of discrimination. It painted Dr. Harrison as an agitated passenger whose escalating demands led to the captain making a procedural decision to return to the gate to de-escalate the situation. The letter subtly implied that Dr. Harrison's actions, not Patricia's, were the root cause of the disruption. It concluded with a lowball offer of a few thousand in travel vouchers and a reinstatement of the corporate account's discount should they choose to return. Sofia Ramirez read the letter in her downtown office, the setting sun casting long shadows across her desk. She laughed out loud, the sound echoing off the glass and steel of her corner office. Amateurs, she muttered. She immediately forwarded it to Maya. Maya read it not with anger, but with a chilling sense of disappointment. So, this is their play, she said to Sofia over the phone. They're going to try and paint me as the angry black woman, a classic if pathetic strategy. They're protecting their employee and betting I'll just go away. It's more than that, Sofia replied, her voice sharp. They're building a defense. They're creating a paper trail to show they took it seriously, investigated, and found their employee blameless. They're preparing for a lawsuit. What they don't know is, so are we. But Atlantic Airways' strategy went beyond a letter. A whisper campaign began. Anonymous sources, likely from Parker's department, started leaking a sanitized pro-airline version of the story to aviation bloggers and industry forums. The narrative was always the same. A difficult VIP passenger caused a flight to turn around over a trivial service complaint. No mention of race, no mention of the specific insults, just the image of an entitled CEO throwing her weight around. Maya started to feel the pressure. Her phone lit up with notifications as the story spread. A colleague from another tech company called her. Maya, what's this I'm hearing about you on that flight? A friend of mine at Atlantic Airways said you had a flight attendant in tears. It was insidious. It was an attack on her reputation, an attempt to reframe her righteous stand as a moment of entitled rage. For a moment, the sheer injustice of it almost overwhelmed her. They were not only refusing to acknowledge the wrong, they were actively trying to punish her for exposing it. Maya stood at the window of her Denver hotel room watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. A familiar voice echoed in her mind, her grandmother saying, "They'll try to make you doubt yourself when you speak truth to power. That's when you know you're winning." She picked up the phone and called Sophia. "They want to play dirty. Let's show them what real power looks like." Sophia Ramirez's corner office on the 42nd floor of a downtown high-rise offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, but her attention was focused entirely on the woman sitting across from her. The late afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, backlighting Maya with a golden glow that seemed symbolic of the righteousness of her cause. "They're going on the offensive," Sophia said, pushing aside the dismissive letter from Atlantic Airways' legal team. "But they've made a critical mistake. They've underestimated us." Maya nodded, her expression resolute. "So, what's our next move?" Sophia leaned forward, her eyes sharp with strategic intensity. "Discovery. We file a lawsuit alleging discrimination, hostile environment, and negligent oversight. But the real goal isn't a courtroom victory. It's what we'll find during discovery." "You think there's more?" Maya asked, a mix of curiosity and determination in her voice. "There's always more," Sophia replied. 30 years at one airline, Bennett didn't suddenly become prejudiced yesterday. And corporations don't rally this hard to protect an employee unless there's something else at stake. The meeting lasted hours as they mapped out a comprehensive legal strategy. The conference room table became covered with documents, legal pads, and empty coffee cups. Sophia's team would depose William Blackwell, Victoria Hamilton, and, critically, Elena Rodriguez. They would demand all of Patricia Bennett's personnel files, every passenger complaint ever filed against her, and all of Gregory Parker's records relating to discrimination complaints. "But we need to move fast," Sophia cautioned. "They're already trying to control the narrative painting you as the aggressor. We need to solidify our witness accounts before memories conveniently change." The next day, Sophia's associate flew to Denver and took a formal, videotaped deposition from William Blackwell. The wood-paneled conference room of his law firm provided a fitting backdrop for his testimony, which was devastatingly precise. He recounted Patricia's overtly dismissive attitude toward Dr. Harrison, contrasting it with her fawning behavior toward other passengers. "In my 35 years practicing law, I've learned to recognize discriminatory intent," Blackwell stated, for the record, his voice carrying the gravitas of his experience. "What I witnessed was a clear and unmistakable display of racial animus. The contrast in Ms. Bennett's treatment of Dr. Harrison compared to the white passengers in first class was stark and undeniable." Coming from a senior partner at a prestigious law firm, his words carried immense weight. Victoria Hamilton's deposition followed. Though initially reluctant to get involved when pressed under oath, she confirmed the disparate treatment. The elderly woman's hands trembled as she recounted what she had witnessed, clearly uncomfortable but committed to the truth. "Yes, Patricia was quite warm with me," she admitted. "She complimented my wrap, offered me extra pillows. I didn't notice at first that she was ignoring the woman in 2A. But when the confrontation happened, it became obvious. She had clearly been avoiding serving her." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm ashamed I didn't speak up. I've been thinking about it ever since. You know, my granddaughter just married a black man, and I keep wondering, is this what they face every day?" The most crucial deposition, however, would be Elena Rodriguez's. As a current Atlantic Airways employee, her testimony could break the case wide open or shut it down completely. The legal team filed their comprehensive discovery motion, demanding access to Patricia Bennett's complete employment record, including all passenger complaints over her 30-year career and all of Gregory Parker's handling of such complaints. Atlantic Airways lawyers fought back vigorously, citing privacy concerns and undue burden. They argued that the request was a phishing expedition designed to embarrass the airline rather than address the specific incident. The judge, swayed by the detailed depositions from Blackwell and Hamilton, granted the motion, though with a narrower scope than Sophia had requested. Still, it was enough. The files would be delivered within 30 days. As they waited for discovery, Sophia's team filed a separate motion demanding all internal communications regarding the incident, including emails between Gregory Parker and Patricia Bennett, and between Parker and CEO Richard Donovan. The goal was clear: prove that the airline's response wasn't just defending an employee, but covering up a pattern of behavior they already knew about. The battle was now fully joined, with both sides marshaling their resources for what promised to be a prolonged and bitter fight. Elena Rodriguez sat in her modest one-bedroom apartment, staring at the subpoena that had arrived that morning. The late afternoon light filtered through half-drawn blinds, casting striped shadows across the document that could change her life. Atlantic Airways' legal department had already called, assuring her that the company would provide representation for her deposition. "Just stick to the facts," the attorney had advised, his tone making it clear which facts he meant. Her phone buzzed again, the third call from Patricia since yesterday. She ignored it, just as she had the others. The voicemails had started solicitous, almost friendly, before turning increasingly demanding. "Elena, we need to get our stories straight," Patricia had said in the last one, dropping all pretense. "Remember who signs your paychecks?" The implied threat was clear. Her union representative had been equally unhelpful. "Look, this is a senior member with 30 years of seniority. You're barely past probation. Think about your career." Elena thought about the moment on the plane when she'd seen the hurt and dignity in Dr. Harrison's eyes. She thought about the countless other times she'd witnessed Patricia's selective service, the coded comments in the galley about these people who didn't belong in first class. She thought about her mother's words when she'd gotten the job with Atlantic Airways. "Represent us well, mijija. Show them we belong anywhere." She thought about her younger brother's recent experience being followed in a department store, coming home angry and humiliated. "You don't understand," he had told her. "Nobody ever believes us." The knock at her door startled her. Through the peephole, she was shocked to see Dr. Maya Harrison herself alone, holding what looked like a takeout bag. The sunset cast a warm glow behind her, making her appear almost haloed in the corridor light. Heart racing, Elena opened the door. "Dr. Harrison," she began, genuinely confused. "How did you—" "I hope you don't mind," Maya said gently. "My legal team found your address for the subpoena. I thought perhaps we could talk. Just us. No lawyers, no recorders. I brought coffee." She held up the bag. "And pastries." The irony of the coffee wasn't lost on either of them. Hesitantly, Elena let her in. The small apartment felt suddenly inadequate. The second-hand furniture and discount store art, a stark contrast to the success Maya Harrison represented. But if Maya noticed, she gave no indication, moving with easy grace to the kitchen table. They sat at Elena's small kitchen table, the unopened pastry bag between them. Steam rose from the coffee cups, spiraling in the late afternoon light. "I'm not going to ask you to do anything that you're not comfortable with," Maya began, "but I want to tell you why I'm pursuing this. This isn't about money for me. This is about ensuring that what happened to me doesn't happen to the next person and the person after that." Maya leaned forward slightly, her eyes intent but kind. "People like Patricia and the managers like Gregory Parker who protect them, they count on the silence of good people like you. They create a culture of fear, and that fear allows them to keep doing what they're doing." Elena stared down at her untouched coffee. "They're saying you were the aggressive one, that you demanded special treatment and threw a fit when you didn't get it." Maya nodded, unsurprised. "And what do you know to be true?" The simple question hung in the air between them, profound in its directness. "That she ignored you," Elena said quietly. "That she serves all the white passengers first, That she calls people of color seat fillers in the galley when she thinks only certain people are listening. Her voice grew stronger. That what she did to you was wrong. But Dr. Harrison, this is my career. If I speak out against her... Elena's voice trailed off, her conflicting emotions visible on her face. When I was starting out, Maya said quietly, I stayed silent too many times. I told myself it was strategic that I was choosing my battles, and sometimes that was true. But other times, I was just afraid. Afraid of the consequences of being labeled difficult of closing doors before they even opened for me. She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes never leaving Elena's. It took me years to realize that silence has its own cost. That each time we let injustice slide, we pay with a piece of our dignity, our integrity. I don't want that for you, Elena. Elena felt tears welling up, surprised by the connection forming between them. This wasn't just about a legal case anymore. This was about something deeper, more fundamental. You told me what she did was wrong. You saw it. You know it, Maya said. The question you have to ask yourself is not what will happen if you speak up, but what will it feel like 5 years from now if you don't? When you see something like this happen again and you know you had a chance to stop it. She then laid a card on the table. My legal team is one of the best in the country. They are prepared to offer you full whistleblower protection and legal representation free of charge. Furthermore, I will personally guarantee you a position within my company's corporate travel department at a higher salary than you make now starting tomorrow if you need it. You will not be unemployed. You will not be ruined. You will be protected. It was an extraordinary offer. It removed the fear. It replaced the risk with security. Tears welled in Elena's eyes. It was the lifeline she didn't even know she could hope for. But it was more than that. It was the chance to become the person she had always wanted to be, someone who stood for what was right, regardless of cost. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll tell them everything. As the last light faded outside the window, the two women sat talking long into the evening, coffee growing cold as a friendship began to form from the ashes of confrontation. A CEO and a flight attendant united by the common experience of fighting to be seen. With Elena's cooperation, the floodgates opened. She provided Sofia Ramirez's investigators with a treasure trove of inside information. She detailed a long-standing culture of cronyism and prejudice among a clique of senior flight attendants with Patricia Bennett as its queen bee. She described how they would trade favorable routes, mock passengers in the galley, and use internal reporting systems to cover for each other's mistakes. The pattern Elena revealed was not of isolated incidents, but of a pervasive culture that had festered for years under management's willful blindness. Most critically, Elena recalled specific incidents. Patricia has a thing about upgrades, Elena explained, her voice steady now with newfound determination. She believes she can spot who deserves to be in first class. She's particularly nasty to people of color who get upgraded. She calls them seat fillers. She'll give them the worst service, forget their meal choice. The incident with you, Dr. Harrison, was the most blatant I've ever seen. But the behavior itself wasn't new. The files arrived in dozens of sealed boxes at Sofia Ramirez's firm. A team of paralegals began the painstaking work of sifting through 30 years of data. The conference room became a makeshift war room, the walls covered with timelines and organizational charts as they pieced together Patricia Bennett's career. For weeks, they found nothing but minor, unsubstantiated complaints, all dismissed by Gregory Parker with boilerplate language. It seemed like a dead end. They've scrubbed the records, a junior associate said in frustration during a late-night review session. The clock on the wall showed 2 a.m. and empty coffee cups and takeout containers littered the table. No, Sophia said, staring at the wall of boxes. They haven't scrubbed them. They've just buried the truth under mountains of irrelevant paper. Keep digging. We're looking for a pattern, a name, anything that connects. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. It wasn't in a passenger complaint.
It was in the expense reports. A sharp-eyed forensic accountant on Sophia's team noticed an anomaly in Patricia's meal and lodging expenses on certain international layovers, specifically in Lisbon and Rio de Janeiro. The receipts were from high-end luxury hotels and Michelin-starred restaurants far exceeding the standard crew allowance, but they had all been approved, signed off by a mid-level manager in the finance department. Why would Parker's HR department include financial records in a file about personnel conduct? Sophia mused, examining the expense reports under the harsh fluorescent light. Unless they didn't know what they were handing over. She tasked an investigator with a simple job: find out who that finance manager was. The investigator came back a day later, excitement evident in his hurried step as he burst into Sophia's office. The manager's name is Miguel Vega. He was Patricia Bennett's husband. They divorced acrimoniously 5 years ago. Get him on the phone, Sophia ordered, sitting up straighter. The investigator found Miguel Vega, now retired and living in Florida. At first, he was reluctant to talk, but when the investigator mentioned Patricia, a dam of resentment broke. "Patricia," he said, his voice dripping with scorn. "She thinks she's untouchable, thinks the rules don't apply to her. She's been running her own little scam at Atlantic Airways for years." "What kind of scam, Mr. Vega?" the investigator asked. "It wasn't just my signing off on her expenses," he confessed, eager to unburden himself. "That was just to keep the peace at home. The real game was with the cargo," he explained in detail. Patricia had a side deal with an art and antique dealer in Lisbon. Small, high-value items, icons, jewelry, rare books weren't declared. They were packed in a custom-made suitcase that she would list as crew baggage, which gets a much less thorough inspection. She'd walk right through customs. A friend in the ground crew would ensure her bag was never flagged. She was a high-end smuggler using her uniform as a cloak of invisibility. She made a fortune. The investigator could barely contain his excitement. "Can you prove this?" "I have copies of bank statements," Miguel said, his voice full of spite. "Statements for an account she didn't think I knew about. I kept them for a rainy day. I'd say a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against my dear ex-wife qualifies as a storm, wouldn't you?" This was it. The karma. The hard, devastating karma. It was bigger and dirtier than anyone could have imagined. Maya's stand against racism had inadvertently hooked a fish so large it was about to pull the entire Atlantic Airways boat under. Sophia hung up the phone after her investigator's report, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. The setting sun through her office window cast her in dramatic silhouette. "Gregory Parker," she said to the empty room. "You thought you were fighting a discrimination case. You're about to get hit with a federal crime." The counteroffensive was complete. They weren't just going to win, they were going to obliterate. But as Sophia prepared to meet with Maya to share the bombshell discovery, she was interrupted by another call from her investigator. "There's more," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "We checked the flight manifests for Patricia's trips to Lisbon. Guess who else was on 3 of those flights?" Sophia sat down slowly. "Who?" "Gregory Parker, first class. All expenses paid, but not by Atlantic Airways. The payments came from the same account that was paying Patricia." Sophia closed her eyes. This wasn't just a rogue flight attendant. This was institutional corruption. Parker wasn't just protecting Patricia out of some misguided loyalty, he was complicit in her crimes. "Get me everything you can find," she ordered. "Bank records, travel dates, hotel stays, and call the Department of Justice. We've moved beyond civil litigation." The evidence extracted from Patricia's embittered ex-husband was the key that unlocked a far darker story than anyone imagined. This wasn't just about expense reports. It was a confession detailing a sophisticated smuggling operation spanning years. Sophia's first call was not to Atlantic Airways, but to the Department of Justice. A civil lawsuit was now a secondary concern. She was holding a stick of dynamite. The DOJ meeting took place in a secure conference room at the federal building.
The room was deliberately intimidating. No windows, harsh lighting, recording equipment visible in the corners. Maya and Sophia presented the evidence to two serious-faced federal prosecutors specialists in white-collar crime and customs violations. "What we have here," Sophia explained, "laying out the documentation, is evidence of a long-running smuggling operation conducted by a senior Atlantic Airways employee, Patricia Bennett, facilitated by at least one accomplice in the airline's ground crew, and possibly with the knowledge and participation of Gregory Parker, Senior VP of Human Resources." The prosecutors reviewed Miguel Vega's statements, the unusual bank deposits correlating with Patricia's international flights, and photographs of undeclared antiques in her possession. Their expressions remained neutral, but the speed with which they took notes betrayed their interest. "This is compelling," the lead prosecutor acknowledged, a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair and a penetrating gaze. "But why bring this to us? Your case against the airline is for discrimination, not smuggling." Maya leaned forward. "Because justice isn't about winning a lawsuit. It's about accountability at every level. Patricia Bennett's behavior toward me was a symptom of a much deeper rot, a belief that rules don't apply to her, that she can act with impunity. Atlantic Airways enabled that attitude by protecting her likely for years. That culture of protection allowed both her discrimination and her criminal enterprise to flourish unchecked." The prosecutor nodded slowly, considering. "We'll need to investigate further. Get warrants, interview witnesses, trace the financial transactions. This could take months." "We understand," Sophia replied. "In the meantime, we'll continue pursuing our civil case. When do you anticipate making your first moves?" "We'll move on the warrants immediately," the prosecutor said. "If what you've provided checks out, we could be conducting searches and interviews within a week. We'd appreciate your discretion until then." As they left the federal building, Maya felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. What had begun as a stand against a personal injustice had uncovered something far uglier. The bright sunshine outside seemed at odds with the darkness they had just exposed. "Are you having second thoughts?" Sophia asked, noting her client's expression. Maya shook her head. "No, just reflecting on how corruption spreads when it goes unchallenged. One act of discrimination seems small, so it's tolerated. That tolerance creates a space where bigger transgressions can grow. Before you know it, you have an entire ecosystem of misconduct." They paused at the courthouse steps, the city bustling around them, oblivious to the storm about to break. "You know," Maya continued, "when I was on that plane, there was a moment when I almost let it go. Just another slight, just another battle not worth fighting. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I had stayed silent." "The smuggling would have continued," Sophia said. "The discrimination would have continued. Nothing would have changed." "Except me," Maya replied quietly. "I would have changed. I would have become a little more accepting of the unacceptable. And that's how they win, not in the big confrontations, but in the 1,000 tiny surrenders we make to avoid them." Sophia nodded, understanding. "That's why what you're doing matters. This isn't just about one flight attendant or one airline. It's about drawing a line." Over the next few days, federal agents quietly conducted background investigations, verifying Miguel Vega's claims and tracing financial transactions. They interviewed former customs officials, examined flight manifests, and built a case methodically. A week later, while Sophia and Maya were meeting to discuss the civil case, Sophia received a text from her DOJ contact. "Warrants approved. Moving tomorrow." The next phase was beginning. The federal hammer was about to drop. The executive conference room at Atlantic Airways headquarters had seen its share of high-stakes meetings, but none quite like this. On one side of the polished mahogany table sat CEO Richard Donovan and his chief counsel Warren Phillips. On the other side sat Maya and Sophia. The room's panoramic views of Chicago were obscured by low-hanging clouds, casting the space in a gloomy half-light. The tension in the room was palpable. Gregory Parker had been pointedly excluded from the meeting at Sophia's insistence. Mr. Donovan, Sophia began dispensing with pleasantries. We're here because your HR department under Mr. Parker's direction responded to my client's legitimate complaint by trying to discredit her. They assumed they could manage a simple discrimination claim. They were mistaken. She slid a single folder across the vast table. That is a copy of the file we delivered to the Department of Justice last week. Donovan's lawyer opened it. His professional composure vanished, replaced by a pallor of shock. He pushed the folder to his CEO, whose face cycled from confusion to disbelief to a deep burning crimson. "This is absurd," Donovan stammered, but the words lacked force. His hand trembled slightly as he closed the folder. "Is it?" Sophia countered, her voice like ice. "We have sworn testimony from Patricia Bennett's ex-husband. We have offshore bank records that correlate with her flight schedule. We have the name of her accomplice in your ground crew. We have evidence suggesting Gregory Parker's involvement. The DOJ finds it quite credible. They are executing warrants as we speak." She let the devastating reality sink in. The clock on the wall seemed abnormally loud in the silence that followed. "Your senior VP of HR was so focused on burying a complaint of racism that he failed to conduct any real due diligence on the employee he was protecting," she continued. "His negligence, or perhaps complicity, allowed a criminal enterprise to fester within your airline. He didn't just fail my client. He failed this entire company. He has exposed Atlantic Airways to a federal investigation and a public relations nightmare that will make this lawsuit look like a rounding error." Maya spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but powerful. "Mr. Donovan, I told your captain this was about accountability. When your company chose to protect a bigot, you unknowingly chose to protect a felon. This is the culture Mr. Parker fostered." Donovan was broken. The risk he now faced was existential. The carefully built facade of corporate respectability was crumbling before his eyes. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice a whisper. "Want?" Sophia replied. "We're past that. Here is what is going to happen. You will terminate Gregory Parker for gross negligence. You will commission a truly independent outside counsel approved by us to overhaul your HR department. You will issue a full public apology to Dr. Harrison acknowledging the discrimination. You will fund a new mandatory anti-bias training program called the Harrison Initiative. And finally, you will settle with my client for damages. The number is 8 figures, and it is non-negotiable." It was total, unconditional surrender. Donovan looked at his lawyer, who gave a single-minute shake of his head. They had no choice. "Agreed," Donovan said, the word tasting like ash. As they left the building, Maya turned to Sophia. "What's happening with the federal investigation right now?" Sophia checked her phone. "According to my contact, they're executing search warrants at Patricia's home and questioning the suspected accomplice at JFK. It's all happening as we speak." Rain had started to fall, the drops racing down the glass facade of the building like tears. Maya nodded, a complex mix of emotions crossing her face. Justice was being served, but at what a cost? All she had wanted was a cup of coffee and the basic dignity of being treated like a human being. Now an entire airline was in turmoil, careers were ending, and people were facing criminal charges. "Having regrets?" Sophia asked, reading her expression. "No," Maya said after a moment. "Just perspective. None of this had to happen. At any point from the moment I boarded to when I first asked for coffee to when the plane landed back in Denver, someone at Atlantic Airways could have done the right thing. They could have acknowledged the wrong, apologized sincerely, and committed to change. Instead, they chose denial, deflection, and attacks. They chose this outcome. That's what makes this case so important," Sophia said. "It's not just about the outcome. It's about the choices that led here." As they drove away from Atlantic Airways headquarters, news alerts began pinging on both their phones. The story of a senior flight attendant being arrested on smuggling charges was breaking. The reckoning had begun. 2 days later, the full story exploded across national news. The images were dramatic and compelling. Federal agents in windbreakers emblazoned with DOJ raiding Patricia Bennett's home at dawn, flashbulbs popping as she was led out in handcuffs. Her perfect hair disheveled her face, a mask of disbelief. The morning news helicopters captured the scene from above, adding to the spectacle of her downfall. Agents found several undeclared antiques matching descriptions from her ex-husband. Her accomplice in the ground crew had been arrested at JFK that same afternoon, immediately offering to cooperate in exchange for leniency. The news of a smuggling ring operating within Atlantic Airways dominated headlines. "First-class felony," screamed the New York Post. "Flight risk attendant arrested in smuggling sting," declared the Chicago Tribune. Every outlet connected the arrest to the discrimination incident that had started it all. Dr. Maya Harrison's name became synonymous with the exposure of both individual prejudice and institutional corruption. The airline's stock plummeted 15% in a single day. Shareholders demanded answers. Board members called emergency meetings. The public relations disaster that Donovan had feared had materialized with a vengeance. That afternoon, Gregory Parker was summoned to the CEO's office. The security cameras captured his confident stride as he approached Donovan's door, utterly unaware of what awaited him. He walked in expecting a strategy session and was met by security. The muscle memory of thousands of termination meetings he had overseen kicked in, but this time he was on the receiving end. He was informed of his immediate termination for gross negligence and failure to properly investigate personnel issues, and was escorted from the building with his belongings in a box, a public casualty of the rot he tried to hide. As security walked him through the executive floor, his former colleagues averted their eyes. Only his assistant looked at him directly, her gaze holding neither sympathy nor surprise, just the quiet satisfaction of someone who had long observed his abuses of power and was now witnessing justice. Patricia Bennett, processed through the federal system, appeared for her arraignment, looking nothing like the imperious flight attendant who had sneered at Maya. Her perfectly styled hair was flat, her uniform replaced by civilian clothes, her makeup-free face drawn with fear. The courtroom lights seemed designed to expose every line of stress, every mark of age she had worked so hard to conceal. Her expression was a mask of stunned disbelief, as the charges were read: conspiracy to smuggle goods into the United States customs fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. The evidence against her was overwhelming: bank records, witness testimonies, even photos of smuggled items found in her home. The prosecutor's request that she be held without bail due to flight risk was granted, the irony of the term not lost on anyone in the courtroom. As she was led away, Patricia caught sight of Maya, who had attended the hearing. Their eyes met briefly, Patricia's filled with hatred, Maya's with solemn recognition of a moment when choices had led to consequences. "All I asked for was a cup of coffee," Maya thought. "And you chose this instead." Elena Rodriguez, who had feared retaliation, found herself instead being treated with new respect by Atlantic Airways management. Her courageous testimony was quietly acknowledged by crew members who had long witnessed Patricia's behavior but had remained silent. Several approached her privately to share their own stories. "I saw what she did to that Japanese family in first class last year," one veteran flight attendant confessed. "I should have said something. You did what I didn't have the guts to do." For Atlantic Airways, the damage control was frantic but futile. The twin scandals of discrimination and smuggling created a perfect storm. Customers canceled bookings. Corporate accounts were suspended pending review. Flight attendant unions demanded new oversight protocols. The FAA announced a special audit of the airline's operations and compliance procedures. CEO Richard Donovan appeared on CNN looking haggard and humbled. The harsh studio lights emphasized the dark circles under his eyes, the strain evident in his voice. "Atlantic Airways has failed its customers, its employees, and the public trust," he admitted. The behavior exhibited by a senior employee was reprehensible, and our response to it was inexcusable. We are committed to a complete overhaul of our corporate culture, beginning with our leadership team. The settlement with Maya was finalized within a week. The amount $12 million was substantial, but the non-monetary terms were more significant. Atlantic Airways committed to implementing the Harrison Initiative, a comprehensive anti-bias training program for all employees. An independent oversight committee would monitor compliance and report publicly on progress. And Atlantic Airways would issue a formal, unequivocal apology acknowledging the discrimination Maya had faced. The public statement, released as a full-page ad in major newspapers, pulled no punches. On August 15th, Dr. Maya Harrison, a distinguished executive and valued customer, experienced inexcusable discrimination aboard our Flight 799. When she rightfully objected to this treatment, our company failed again by attempting to dismiss and discredit her legitimate concerns. We acknowledge this discrimination without reservation and apologize to Dr. Harrison and to all our customers who deserve better. For Patricia, the unraveling was complete. The prosecution's case, bolstered by Miguel Vega's testimony and financial records, was overwhelming. Security camera footage showed her handing off packages to her accomplice at various airports. Bank records revealed deposits coinciding with her international flights. Former colleagues came forward with stories of suspicious behavior they had previously dismissed. Facing decades in federal prison, she accepted a plea deal for a reduced sentence of 8 years. As she was led from the courtroom, her eyes briefly met Maya's, who had attended the sentencing. There was no triumph in Maya's gaze, just a quiet acknowledgement of a cycle completed. In that moment, something unexpected happened. Patricia paused, then spoke directly to Maya. "You know," she said, her voice barely audible, "I never thought I'd get caught. Not for the smuggling, not for anything. 30 years of doing whatever I wanted. I guess I should have just brought you the damn coffee." The comment wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. For the first time, Patricia was facing the reality that she wasn't untouchable after all. For Atlantic Airways, the road to recovery would be long. The Harrison Initiative became the centerpiece of their rehabilitation effort. External auditors were brought in to examine every aspect of their corporate culture. New leadership was recruited with a mandate for transformation. The karma had been swift and brutal, initiated by a simple request for a cup of coffee and sustained by an unshakable demand for dignity. Maya sat in her office at Ecosphere Technologies, looking out at the Denver skyline as Diana Morales reviewed the final settlement documents. The morning light bathed the city in a golden glow, the mountains standing majestic in the distance, a view that always centered her, reminded her of the bigger picture. "It's all in order," Diana confirmed, her efficient movements contrasting with the moment's significance. "The first installment of the Harrison Initiative funding has been transferred. The Oversight Committee members have all accepted their appointments, and your personal settlement has been deposited." Maya nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Has the foundation been established?" "Yes. The Equal Skies Foundation is officially incorporated. The board is ready to begin reviewing grant applications." Maya had decided to use the entire $12 million settlement to establish a foundation dedicated to promoting diversity in aviation and STEM fields. The money would fund scholarships for young women of color pursuing careers in these traditionally white-dominated industries. "And Elena?" Maya asked, thinking of the young woman whose courage had been so crucial. "She starts next week in our corporate travel department. I've arranged temporary housing until she finds a place, and HR has her benefits package ready." Maya smiled, a genuine warmth reaching her eyes. "Good. Make sure she knows she's not just getting a job, she's getting a career path. I want her to understand that her courage is valued here." The phone rang. It was Sophia Ramirez. "Have you seen the latest?" Sophia asked, without preamble, excitement evident in her voice. "No, what's happened?" 3 more airlines have announced anti-bias training programs modeled on the Harrison Initiative. They're not waiting to be forced into it. They're getting ahead of the curve. Maya felt a wave of satisfaction.
This was the real victory, not the money, not even seeing Patricia face justice, but the ripple effect changing an industry. "That's what we wanted," Maya said. "Structural change." "There's more," Sophia continued. "I've been contacted by the Air Travel Association. They want you to keynote their annual conference. Theme, Transforming Aviation Culture." Maya laughed softly. "From unwelcome passenger to keynote speaker. That's quite a journey." "It's more than that," Sophia said seriously. "You've become a symbol, Maya, not just of standing up against discrimination, but of demanding institutional accountability. People are seeing that one person really can change a system if they refuse to back down."
After hanging up, Maya swiveled her chair to face the wall where she'd hung a simple framed photograph, the interior of a first-class cabin, empty seats gleaming under soft lighting. It was a reminder both of what had happened and of what was possible. The settlement wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about acknowledgement, about consequences, about ensuring that the next Maya Harrison who stepped onto a plane would be seen respected and served without question. She thought about the cost of her stand, the time, the stress, the energy diverted from her company, the unwanted publicity. Had it been worth it? In her quieter moments, Maya sometimes wondered if she could have found an easier way, a less confrontational path. But then she remembered Patricia's face when she had dismissed her, the casualness with which she had attempted to erase Maya's dignity. She remembered the relief in Elena's eyes when she realized she wasn't alone in her fight. She thought of the letters she'd received from people sharing similar experiences, thanking her for taking a stand. Yes, it had been worth it. Every moment. And for the first time since that day on Flight 719, Maya felt a sense of closure. Not because justice had been served, though it had decisively, but because something new was growing from the ashes of that confrontation. Something better. She opened her drawer and pulled out a small silver pin, a miniature coffee cup that Sophia had given her when the settlement was finalized. "Never forget what started all this," Sophia had said with a wry smile. Maya pinned it to her lapel, a tiny symbol of a momentous stand. She turned back to her desk and the stack of proposals waiting for her review. The work of transformation was just beginning. The conference room at Atlantic Airways headquarters buzzed with nervous energy. 30 flight attendants representing every hub in the airline's network waited for the day's training to begin. The previously sterile corporate space had been transformed walls, now featured diverse faces of aviation pioneers, quotes about dignity and respect, and most prominently, a large sign reading, "The Harrison Initiative because dignity is not optional." At the front of the room, Elena Rodriguez adjusted her presentation materials, a Harrison Initiative Lead Facilitator badge prominently displayed on her blazer. Her transformation was remarkable. The nervous flight attendant who had once feared speaking up now stood with confidence before her former colleagues. It had been 14 months since Flight 719, and the airline was a changed organization. A new CEO, new head of HR, new training protocols, and a renewed commitment to building an inclusive culture. The Harrison Initiative was now mandatory for every employee from baggage handlers to executives. "Good morning." Elena began, her voice confident in a way it never had been before. "Welcome to the Harrison Initiative's core training module. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and I was on Flight 719 with Dr. Maya Harrison." A murmur went through the room. Everyone knew about Flight 719. It had become legend, a cautionary tale, a turning point. "Today isn't about shame or blame," Elena continued. "It's about awareness. About recognizing that our biases, even unconscious ones, can hurt people and create unsafe environments. It's about doing better." She clicked to the first slide, which showed a simple image, a cup of coffee. "This is where it started," she said. "A simple request for a cup of coffee denied because of who was asking. Today we'll examine why that happened, how it escalated, and most importantly, how each of us has the power to create a different outcome." Over the next 6 hours, Elena led the group through exercises, discussions, and case studies. They examined real incidents of discrimination in aviation, analyzed their own potential blind spots, and practiced intervention techniques for when they witnessed problematic behavior. At one point, she shared her own story, her fear, her silence, her ultimate decision to speak up. "The hardest thing wasn't testifying," she told the group. "It was living with myself in those moments when I saw what was happening and did nothing. We all have those moments. Today is about making different choices the next time." At day's end, a senior flight attendant approached Elena. "I've been flying for 22 years, she said quietly, "and I realized today that I've been part of the problem without even knowing it. Thank you for this." Elena smiled. "That's why we do this work. Recognition is the first step to change." Meanwhile, at the Department of Transportation in Washington, Maya was presenting the preliminary findings of a landmark study commissioned by the Equal Skies Foundation. The research had surveyed thousands of passengers of color about their experiences in air travel, revealing patterns of disparity that had previously been dismissed as isolated incidents. "What we're seeing is not isolated," Maya explained to the panel of officials. "It's pervasive, but often invisible to those who don't experience it. The good news is that airlines who have implemented comprehensive training programs like the Harrison Initiative are already showing significant improvements in passenger satisfaction scores across all demographic groups." The DOT secretary nodded appreciatively. "Dr. Harrison, your work is changing the industry. We're incorporating your foundation's recommendations into our new passenger rights regulations." 3 years after Flight 719, Patricia Bennett was serving her sentence at a minimum security federal prison in Florida. The Stark facility was a far cry from the luxurious hotels and restaurants she had once frequented on her smuggling trips. She had become a model prisoner teaching GED classes to other inmates, and in a twist of irony, participating in the prison's restorative justice program. During a supervised family visit in the prison's sunny but sparse visiting area, her daughter asked, "Mom, do you regret what you did?" Patricia was quiet for a long moment, the weight of her choices visible in the new lines on her face, the gray roots showing in her once perfect hair. "I regret who I became," she finally answered. "I let entitlement and prejudice corrupt me. I thought rules were for other people. I was wrong and I hurt people. Yes, I regret it deeply." Her daughter reached across the table and took her hand, the first genuine human contact Patricia had initiated in years. "Maybe when you get out, you could talk to people about what happened, how it started, how it went so wrong. Maybe that could be your way of making amends." Patricia nodded slowly. "Maybe it could." It was a small redemption, but a real one. Patricia would never again work in aviation, but she might yet find a way to make amends. Gregory Parker had not fared as well. Unable to find comparable work after his very public firing, he had retreated from corporate life altogether. The federal investigation had revealed his knowledge of Patricia's smuggling operation, though prosecutors ultimately lacked sufficient evidence to charge him as a co-conspirator. His legacy was that of a cautionary tale in HR circles, the executive who protected the wrong person and brought down an airline. For Atlantic Airways, the transformation continued. Their once plummeting stock had stabilized. Their new marketing campaign prominently featured diverse crews and passengers. The Harrison Initiative had expanded to include community outreach programs in underserved areas, introducing young people of color to careers in aviation. And for Maya Harrison, the incident that could have been merely a painful memory had instead become a catalyst for her most meaningful work. While still leading Ecosphere Technologies, she had become a respected voice on corporate ethics and inclusion, speaking at conferences worldwide and advising companies on meaningful cultural change. She and Elena had developed a friendship that transcended their unlikely beginning. They met monthly for coffee, always black, always served with respect, to discuss the initiative's progress and share stories of change happening throughout the industry. The ripples from that day on Flight 719 continued to spread, touching countless lives and creating space for dignity, where before there had been only erasure. 5 years to the day after Flight 719, Maya stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Global Aviation Forum. The space was magnificent, soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and windows overlooking the New York skyline at sunset. Before her sat the leaders of virtually every major airline in the world, along with regulators, union representatives, and industry journalists. 5 years ago, Maya began, I asked for a cup of coffee. A knowing murmur ran through the audience. Everyone knew the story. The simple phrase had become shorthand in the industry. For the moment, everything changed. Maya glanced down at the silver coffee cup pin she still wore on special occasions like this, a small reminder of how profound change can begin with the smallest stand for dignity. What followed was much more than a customer service failure. It was a moment of truth that exposed the gap between what we say we value as a society and how we actually behave. It revealed how institutions often protect the wrong things, reputation over truth, procedures over people, the status quo over justice. She gestured to a screen behind her where a graph showed dramatic improvements in passenger satisfaction scores among travelers of color across all participating airlines. The visualization was striking a steep upward curve that represented not just statistics but real human experiences improved. Today, the Harrison Initiative operates in 47 airlines across 6 continents. Over 350,000 aviation professionals have completed the training. Reports of discriminatory incidents have declined by 64%, but numbers only tell part of the story. Maya clicked to the next slide, showing a young black woman in a pilot's uniform standing proudly beside an aircraft. Her smile was radiant, her posture confident, the embodiment of belonging. This is Zoe Williams. She was one of our first Equal Skies Foundation scholarship recipients. Today, she's a first officer with Suncoast Airlines. She told me that before the foundation, she never saw aviation as a possible career path. No one in her community flew planes, but now she does, and dozens more like her are following in her footsteps. Maya paused, looking out at the audience, making eye contact with Elena in the front row. Elena, now the executive director of the Harrison Initiative, smiled encouragingly, her eyes reflecting their shared journey. What happened on Flight 719 was painful. It was humiliating. But what has grown from that moment is something I could never have imagined. We've created pathways where there were walls. We've built bridges where there were chasms. We've turned a moment of exclusion into a movement of inclusion. She took a deep breath, her voice growing stronger. The most powerful words in any language are, I see you. They acknowledge existence. They confer dignity. They create belonging. 5 years ago, a flight attendant tried to make me invisible. Today, because of that moment, thousands of people who might have remained unseen are being recognized, respected, and welcomed. The ballroom erupted in applause. The sound swelled, filling the space with affirmation. As Maya stepped away from the podium, she was surrounded by industry leaders eager to share their own initiatives and progress. Later that evening, Maya and Elena sat in a quiet corner of the hotel bar, the soft piano music and amber lighting creating an intimate space within the busy venue. Did you ever imagine we'd end up here? Elena asked, gesturing to the room full of aviation executives who had just spent the day discussing diversity and inclusion as business imperatives. Maya smiled. Never. I was just trying to get to New York. They both laughed, the shared joke a reminder of how far they'd come. You know what I think about sometimes? Maya said, twirling her wine glass thoughtfully. That cup of coffee I never got. Such a small thing. But it wasn't about the coffee. It was about being seen, Elena finished for her. About basic human dignity. Exactly. And now we're helping create a world where everyone is seen. Maya raised her glass. To visibility,
Elena clinked her glass against Maya's. To visibility. As they talked into the night, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows planning the next phase of the Harrison Initiative's work, they knew the journey was far from over. But they had proven that change was possible. That one person standing firm in their dignity could indeed move an industry. That sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply refusing to be erased. And somewhere in the skies above them, on countless flights across the world, coffee was being served with something that hadn't always accompanied it before respect. In her home office overlooking the Denver skyline, Maya Harrison closed her journal, completing her ritual 5-year reflection on Flight 719. The evening light painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold, a reminder of the beauty that had sustained her through difficult times. What had begun as therapy documenting her feelings about the incident had evolved into an annual practice of measuring progress and setting new goals. The leather-bound journal was now filled with 5 years of reflections, each entry marking another stage in a journey that had transformed not just an industry, but her own understanding of purpose. So much had changed in 5 years. Ecosphere Technologies had doubled in size, its agricultural AI solutions now deployed in 27 countries. The Equal Skies Foundation had awarded over 500 scholarships. The Harrison Initiative had become the industry standard for anti-bias training. But the most profound changes were internal. Maya thought back to who she had been before that flight, accomplished, confident, but also accustomed to silently enduring microaggressions, picking her battles, letting small indignities slide to preserve her energy for more important fights. She remembered the moment on the plane when she had almost let it go, the split second when exhaustion and practicality had nearly won out over principle. How different would her life be now if she had chosen silence that day? Flight 719 had transformed that calculus. It taught her that no dignity was minor, no respect optional, no battle too small when it came to being treated as fully human. This lesson had reshaped her leadership at Ecosphere. She had created a mentorship program specifically for young women of color in tech, offering not just professional guidance, but also strategies for navigating predominantly white spaces with confidence and self-advocacy. You don't have to choose between success and dignity, she often told her mentees. You deserve both, and by demanding both, you make it easier for those who come after you. The incident had also reframed her thinking about accountability. Maya had initially struggled with the severity of the consequences Patricia and Gregory faced. Had she gone too far? Should she have accepted the airline's initial settlement offer and moved on? Time and perspective had settled those questions. She hadn't created the consequences. She had simply refused to participate in a cover-up. The system that protected Patricia's bigotry had also sheltered her criminal activity. Exposing one inevitably exposed the other. Maya took out the photograph of her and Elena at last year's Equal Skies Foundation Gala. Their unlikely friendship had become one of the most meaningful relationships in her life. They had seen each other at their most vulnerable and their most powerful. They had built something lasting from a moment that could have remained just another painful memory. Sometimes the hardest path leads to the most beautiful destinations, Elena had said that night. The simple wisdom of it still resonated. Maya had come to see accountability not as punishment, but as restoration, a necessary step toward healing and rebuilding. She took no joy in Patricia's imprisonment or Gregory's downfall, but she recognized the essential justice in them facing the results of their choices. This balanced view informed the Harrison Initiative's approach, which focused not on shame or blame, but on awareness, empathy, and positive change. The program emphasized that biases themselves weren't moral failings, they were human limitations that could be recognized and overcome. Perhaps most surprisingly, the incident had deepened Maya's capacity for hope. Witnessing an entire industry transform in response to one clear stand for dignity had convinced her that no entrenched problem was immovable,
no institutional culture unchangeable when confronted with truth and persistence. This hope fueled her latest project, expanding the Harrison Initiative beyond aviation into healthcare, hospitality, and education fields, where similar patterns of exclusion and bias affected millions daily. As the sun set over the mountains, Maya closed her journal and prepared for her evening meeting with Equal Skies Foundation scholarship recipients. These brilliant, determined young women represented the future she had been fighting for, a future where they would walk into any space from cockpits to boardrooms with the unquestioned certainty that they belonged. She picked up the small silver coffee cup pin from her desk and attached it to her jacket lapel, a reminder that sometimes the smallest stands create the largest ripples. The data was undeniable. In the 5 years since the Harrison Initiative began participating, airlines had seen a 64% reduction in discrimination complaints, a 47% increase in customer satisfaction scores among travelers of color, and a 38% rise in workforce diversity. What had started as one airline's crisis response had evolved into an industry-wide transformation. Aviation, long resistant to change, had become an unexpected leader in corporate inclusion efforts. The initiative's success had captured attention far beyond aviation. Healthcare systems were adopting modified versions of the training to address disparities in patient care. Hotel chains were implementing similar programs after studies showed consistent patterns of discriminatory treatment toward guests of color. Universities were incorporating the curriculum into their hospitality and business programs. In boardrooms across the country, executives were reconsidering their approaches to diversity and inclusion. Before Flight 719, such efforts were often framed as charitable initiatives or PR exercises. Now they were increasingly discussed as risk management and quality control essential components of operational excellence. At industry conferences, CEOs spoke of Harrison-proofing their customer service protocols, a shorthand for ensuring that frontline staff were equipped to serve all customers with equal respect and care. HR departments conducted Parker audits to identify potential liability blind spots in their complaint resolution processes. The most significant change, however, was in the everyday experiences of travelers. A recent industry survey revealed that 72% of passengers of color reported feeling always or usually respected during air travel, up from just 31% 5 years earlier. As Maya often noted in her speeches, these statistics represented real people experiencing real dignity in spaces where they had previously felt unwelcome or invisible. Beyond the airlines, the Equal Skies Foundation had expanded its mission, now offering scholarships in hospitality, healthcare, and education fields, where representation directly impacted how different communities were served and respected. The story of Flight 719 was now taught in business ethics courses, a case study in how individual courage could trigger institutional change and how corporations could transform crisis into opportunity by embracing accountability rather than avoiding it. The Harrison Initiative had proven that structural change wasn't just possible, it was practical, profitable, and professionally essential in a diverse global marketplace. As the lights dimmed in the Global Aviation Forum ballroom, Maya Harrison stood before a packed audience one final time. This would be her last keynote as the public face of the Harrison Initiative, before passing the torch to Elena and a new generation of leaders. The room was hushed in anticipation. The only sound the soft click of her advancing to the final slide, a simple white coffee cup against a black background. "We began this journey with a simple request for a cup of coffee," she said, her voice strong and clear. "We end it with an industry transformed, but our work is far from complete." Maya looked out at the faces before her airline executives, flight attendants, pilots, ground crew regulators, all united in a shared commitment that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago. What Flight 799 taught us is that dignity is not negotiable. It cannot be suspended at 35,000 feet.
It cannot be reserved for some passengers and withheld from others. It is the minimum standard for human interaction, not a luxury upgrade. She paused, letting the words resonate through the silent hall. But Flight 799 taught us something else, too. It showed us that a single person standing firmly in their truth can change an entire system.
Not through violence or vengeance, but through the simple, powerful act of refusing to be erased. On the screen behind her appeared a photo of Elena's first day as a flight attendant, nervous but proud in her uniform, followed by a current image of her confidently leading a Harrison Initiative training session. Change happens when ordinary people find the courage to stand for what's right even when it's difficult. It happens when institutions have the humility to acknowledge failures and commit to doing better. It happens when we all recognize that the true measure of our character isn't how we treat those we respect, but how we treat everyone. Maya turned toward the image of the coffee cup, its simplicity a powerful reminder of how this journey began. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the smallest requests. A request to be seen, a request to be served, a request to be treated with the dignity that is the birthright of every human being. She smiled, not the polished smile of a corporate speaker, but the genuine expression of someone who had fought a difficult battle and found meaning in the struggle. As I leave this stage today, I ask each of you to carry this work forward. See the unseen. Serve the underserved. Stand with those who stand alone. Because in the end, we are not just building better airlines or better companies. We are building a better world, one cup of coffee at a time. The audience rose in a standing ovation, the applause thunderous and sustained. As Maya made her way off the stage, dozens of people reached out to touch her arm or shake her hand, each with a story of how the Harrison Initiative had changed their workplace, their perspectives, their lives. Elena met her at the bottom of the steps, enveloping her in a warm embrace. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it," Maya corrected her. "And now we keep going." As they walked together through the crowd, Maya caught sight of a flight attendant serving coffee to an elderly black woman with exquisite care and respect. The simple interaction, once so fraught, now so natural, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. In that moment, Maya knew with absolute certainty that what had begun as her darkest day had blossomed into her greatest legacy. The flight that never reached New York had ultimately arrived at a far more important destination, a future where dignity was no longer a privilege for some, but a promise for all. Thank you for listening to this true story of courage, accountability, and transformation. If this narrative resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of justice and dignity. Remember, change begins with each of us standing firm in our truth and refusing to be erased. Sometimes the smallest stand creates the most profound ripples. Until next time, see the unseen, serve the underserved, and never underestimate your power to transform the world around you.